Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I prefer books over people. My friends knew I was feeling down lately and convinced me to go out with them. So there I was, in a crowded club on Friday night around 10 o'clock p.m., trying to enjoy myself while feeling out of place. The club had an entrance fee of $25, which seemed excessive for a place I didn't even want to be. My three closest friends had practically dragged me there, promising it would lift my spirits after losing my job at the publishing company 2 weeks ago. I noticed a woman at the bar looking at me. She was overdressed for the venue and kept staring while talking to the bartender. I smiled and turned away, hoping to avoid attention, but she wanted to be noticed. She shouted over the music for me to come over. I hesitated but eventually went to her. I asked if I could help. She looked me up and down and asked if I was the guy from the bookstore. I nodded, wondering how she knew. I had started working at the small independent bookshop only 3 days ago after being unemployed for almost 2 weeks. The owner was a kind elderly man who had given me the job despite my lack of retail experience. Her tone changed as she told me she needed help. She said she lost her phone and thought someone stole it. The phone was apparently brand new and cost $1,200. She asked if I could help find it. I was surprised by her request but agreed. We searched the club together for about 45 minutes, checking under tables, asking the bartender, even looking in the bathroom. The bouncer even let us check the lost and found box, which contained several items, but no expensive smartphone. We found nothing and decided to give up around 11:15 p.m. When we finished searching, she stopped and turned to me. She accused me of stealing her phone and said I just wanted her number. I tried to explain I was helping her the whole time, but she wouldn't listen. She said that's what a thief would do and threatened to make me pay before walking away. She even threatened to call the police and have me arrested on the spot. Several people nearby had started watching our interaction, making me feel even more uncomfortable. I told my friends what happened when I finally found them on the dance floor. They said she was being ridiculous and to forget about it. My friend suggested we leave the club early around 11:30 p.m. to avoid any further confrontation. I agreed, relieved to escape the thumping music and the accusatory glares from the woman who had now joined a group of equally well-dressed friends. The next day, around 2 p.m., the police called. They said I was accused of stealing a phone and needed to come in for questioning. She had actually gone to the police and filed a formal report against me. The officer mentioned the phone was valued at $1,200, making the alleged theft a felony rather than a misdemeanor. My stomach dropped at the realization of how serious this had become. At the station, a detective took me to a small room with fluorescent lighting that made the space feel cold and clinical. He showed me a blurry security image of me with the woman at the club and said they had evidence I was the last person with her phone. The timestamp on the footage showed it was taken at approximately 10:45 p.m. I explained the image only showed me talking to her while helping look for her phone. He said witnesses saw us together before her phone went missing. The detective mentioned 3 separate witnesses had given statements against me. I told him she asked for my help and that I work at a bookstore and don't steal phones. I explained I had just started a new job after being unemployed and had no reason to risk everything for a stranger's phone. The detective kept twisting my words for nearly 30 minutes. He suggested that perhaps I was desperate for money after losing my previous job, implying I might have sold the phone already. After his persistent questioning, I got frustrated and stood up, refusing to be accused of something I didn't do. The door opened and she walked in smirking. She told the detective my anger proved I was guilty. She claimed her phone contained irreplaceable photos and videos of her recently deceased pet, adding emotional weight to her accusation. I was upset but stayed focused. I told them I could prove my innocence. Before coming to the station, I went back to the club around noon and talked to the manager. I had to wait nearly 2 hours for him to arrive for his shift. He agreed to check the security footage from that night after I explained my situation. The manager seemed sympathetic, mentioning this wasn't the first time someone had made accusations about stolen property in his establishment. I showed them the video on my phone. It showed what happened after we separated at 11:20 p.m. She went back to her table, searched her purse for approximately 3 minutes, and found her phone. Then she went outside showing it to her friends and taking selfies with them. The detective watched the video, then turned to her. He asked if this was true. She stumbled with her words, then admitted she found it later, but insisted she thought I took it first. The detective told her she filed a false report, which could result in a fine of up to $1,000 and possible jail time. Her face went pale when she realized the severity of her actions. She tried to justify herself by saying she initially thought I stole her phone, then I annoyed her by yelling, so she wanted to teach me a lesson. She even claimed I had seemed suspicious because I was alone at the bar for so long before she approached me. The detective had another officer take her to a holding cell. The officer explained she would be processed and potentially charged with filing a false police report and wasting police resources. As they led her away, she looked at me with hatred. I turned away from her, relieved that the truth had come out. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see her charging at me after somehow breaking free from the officer's grip. She screamed I ruined her life and tried to hit me. She claimed she would lose her job if she got a criminal record, as she worked in finance handling sensitive client information. I moved back just in time. An officer tasered her before she could try again. The shock made her collapse instantly to the floor. After they took her away, the detective apologized for the ordeal and offered me a cup of coffee. He asked if I wanted to press charges for the assault. He explained that adding assault charges could extend her potential sentence by up to 6 months. I thought about it for nearly 5 minutes. She was already in trouble for the false report and attacking me in a police station. More charges meant more time in court for me, potentially causing me to miss shifts at my new job. I declined and said I just wanted to leave and forget everything. The detective took my statement, which took approximately 45 minutes to complete. He thanked me for my cooperation and let me go around 5:30 p.m. He mentioned they would still be charging her with filing a false report regardless of my decision about the assault. I went home feeling drained after spending nearly 4 hours at the police station. Sitting on my couch, I wondered what I went through and why she targeted me. My phone buzzed with a text from the bookstore owner asking if everything was okay since I had missed my afternoon shift. I briefly explained the situation, worried I might lose my new job. To my surprise, he was understanding and told me to take the next day off with pay to recover from the ordeal. That small kindness brought tears to my eyes after such a stressful day. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from the county courthouse. It stated that the woman had been charged with filing a false police report and resisting arrest. She was ordered to pay a fine of $750 and perform 100 hours of community service. The letter also told me that she had been required to attend an anger management course. When dealing with entitled people, logic doesn't work. They live in their own reality where they're always right. Next time my friends want to go out, I'll stick with my books. At least fictional villains stay on the page. And I've learned that real-life drama is far more exhausting than any thriller I've ever read. 4 years ago, when I was 24, my mom died of breast cancer. It wasn't sudden. We'd watched her fight for months, but the end still hit me like a truck. Both my grandmothers had also died from breast cancer. With that family history, I knew I needed to get checked out. The specialist's office was cold. When the doctor came in with my results, her face told me everything before she spoke. They found cells in one of my breasts that could turn cancerous at any moment. She laid out my options. I could have regular screenings every few months until it developed into cancer. The risk was high given my family history, though it might never turn cancerous. Another option was a single mastectomy on the affected breast, though they'd still need to monitor the other one. The third option was a bilateral mastectomy to remove all breast tissue, which would eliminate the risk. I sat there in that paper gown, my heart racing. All I could think about was my mum in her final days, how the cancer had hollowed her out. I couldn't go through that. I told her I wanted the bilateral mastectomy. The doctor warned me about scarring but said it would be fairly minor. She was wrong. After the surgery, I was left with two huge pink jagged scars on either side of my chest. Each was about an inch long and half an inch wide. They weren't just marks, they were angry, raised reminders etched into my skin. I fell into depression. I stopped leaving my flat because I didn't want anyone to see me. I threw out all my mirrors because I couldn't stand my reflection. The sight of my own body made me sick. After months of this, I went to a therapist. After several sessions, she suggested seeing a plastic surgeon. She could see how much I was struggling. The plastic surgeon gave me three options: a special cream, laser treatments, or implants. I tried the cream first, but it did nothing. The laser treatments were both expensive and risky, so I went with the implants. My natural breasts had been an F cup, but I decided to go slightly smaller with a double D. The difference in my mental health was immediate. My confidence returned. My self-esteem improved. I knew I shouldn't put so much importance on my appearance, but these weren't just any scars. They were disfiguring, pink, jagged, raised wounds that I hated seeing, and now they were hidden away. Fast forward to the present. I'm 28 years old and working in an office. Life is good. Then came Jill. One day, my friend from before the mastectomy and I were planning a holiday at lunch, and she made a joke about me going on a plane with my implants. My co-worker Jill heard. By the end of the day, the entire office knew I'd had a boob job, but not why. Over the next few months, Jill made jokes and comments about my chest to co-workers when I was in earshot. One time she compared me to Barbie, saying I had more plastic than the doll. Another time, when I disagreed with her about something work-related, she accused me of being fake in two ways. I didn't hear this one myself, but a friend in the office told me that Jill had called me a sack of silicone to a group of co-workers by the coffee machine. I wasn't sure what her problem was, but at one point she mentioned the National Health Service, so I think she thought I'd gotten my implants for free on taxpayer money. In reality, I'd gotten the mastectomy on the NHS but paid for therapy and implants. I asked her to stop more than once. I would ask that she stop making comments about my chest, explaining that it was inappropriate and made me uncomfortable. She would dismiss my concerns, telling me not to be so sensitive and claiming she was just joking. These conversations usually happened in places like the lift or the women's bathroom where there weren't any cameras. Jill kept making comments no matter how often I asked her not to. It wasn't every day, but I heard at least 3 comments per week for 3 months. I hit my breaking point when Jill, myself, and a few other co-workers were having lunch together. I called something shallow and Jill pounced. She said I would know all about being shallow while pointing to my chest. Something inside me snapped. I told her then about the cancer cells the doctors had found in my breast tissue years ago. I told her about the mastectomy and the huge scars I was left with. I described how I'd gone to a therapist who sent me to a cosmetic surgeon who told me to get implants to hide the scars. I explained that I'd done it just so I could look at myself in the mirror without crying. I said next time she wanted to judge someone for having cosmetic surgery, she should ask them why they had it first. I picked up my food and left. For the rest of the day, about a third of my office came up to me and offered support. The rest said that Jill was just joking around and I was being a witch. I replied that Jill was being a witch long before I was. Then I got an email from Human Resources saying they wanted to talk to me the next day. When I called for clarification, they mentioned a hostile work environment. I knew the person who signed off the email. Her name was Debbie, and she was Jill's friend in HR. I knew who had reported me. I realized that if this was going to HR, I needed as much ammunition as possible. As Debbie had dealt with me so far, it was safe to assume she would be the person reviewing the complaint with me. If that was true, I was screwed. I remembered a section on complaints in my contract. I flipped through it and found a part that said I was allowed to request a change of reviewer if I felt my allocated reviewer was biased. It was called an impartial overseer. I photocopied the page and highlighted that part. Then I messaged the people who had offered their support over Facebook. I asked if anyone remembered Jill insulting me and if they would write and sign something stating what they'd heard and when. Not everyone was willing to help. Jill was feared in the office due to her friendships with HR and management, but about 20 people were willing to support me. I tried to remember when I'd asked Jill to stop previously, the 4 asks over the last few months, and wrote them all down, along with a rough time of when the lunchroom confrontation happened and a list of names of who was there. The next morning, I got to work early. I went around to everyone who had messaged me, and most of them gave me a printed and signed letter. The letter stated their name, that they worked with Jill and me, and detailed when they had heard Jill referring to me using insulting terms. They mentioned feeling that this was inappropriate as it related to my appearance, and said they would go on record to establish that Jill had been discussing me in the workplace in this manner for 3 months, causing discomfort and creating a hostile work environment. I wound up with about 16 letters, all from different people, and one of them was in the lunchroom for my conversation with Jill. Some even had lists of everything Jill had said to them about me or other people. It turned out Jill had issues with a lot of people's appearances. She made comments about one co-worker's weight and something anti-Semitic about a different co-worker's nose, all of which were included in these letters. There are about 45 people in the office, so while 16 wasn't a majority, it was still a decent amount. The letters weren't huge, most were only a paragraph, but they contained all unnecessary information. I was asked to come to HR at 10 a.m. I took the letters from co-workers, the photocopy of the page in my contract, and my dates and times in a little folder with me. When I arrived, Debbie was waiting for me. She got up from her desk, ready to lead me into another room. I turned to the other HR worker who was there and asked if my meeting was with them instead. Debbie said that I would be meeting with her. I explained that this wouldn't work for me, as my contract stated I had a right to an impartial overseer. I took the contract page out of my folder. Debbie read it. I wouldn't let her take the paper when there was a shredder so close by, and tried to tell me she could be impartial. I said I didn't mean to be difficult, but I had good reason to believe that the person on the other end of this complaint was her friend, and my contract allowed me an impartial overseer. Debbie walked off to get her supervisor. When he arrived, he asked how I knew she couldn't be impartial. I explained that I had information that Jill, who was on the other end of this complaint, was a close friend of Debbie. He asked Debbie if this was true, to which she only said that she could be impartial. The supervisor took a deep breath, asked the other HR representative to come with him, and the 4 of us went to review the complaint. I thanked them for being so accommodating. Debbie took out the complaint, and all 3 of them went through it with me. Debbie looked angry the whole time, as she had clearly expected to fire me, or at least recommend I be fired. The interview involved several questions about my situation. They asked why I thought Jill had reported me, and I explained that she'd had an issue with me for about 3 months. When they asked why I hadn't come to HR earlier, I said that I didn't have an issue with her personally. They asked what issue Jill had with me, which gave me the chance to explain my full medical history, the cancer cells, the mastectomy, the resulting scars, the therapy, and the plastic surgery to hide the scars with implants. I mentioned that all of this was in my medical history, which they had on file, and my permission to review. I explained that Jill had found out about my implants but not the cancer, and had decided to make this her business. When asked why I believed this was true, I presented the 16 signed statements from different co-workers, all saying that Jill had told the entire office about my breast implants and had been making comments about them frequently. They asked about the dates and times, and I explained that no one knew this would be escalated so extensively, so detailed notes hadn't been taken at the time. They asked about what events I thought had led to the harassment complaint against me. I explained that from my perspective, the harassment began when Jill told everyone about my implants without consent, but the complaint against me likely stemmed from the lunchroom confrontation the day before. I described how Jill had made a comment about me being shallow while pointing to my chest, and I had responded by explaining my medical history. I said I could have handled it better, but felt I needed to stand up for myself after 3 months of harassment. I provided a list of people who were present and mentioned that one of them had included their account in their signed letter. When asked if I'd spoken to Jill about her comments previously, I said that I had done so several times over the 3-month period, each time expressing my discomfort and asking her to stop. They asked if Jill had been aware of my cancer history, and I said she hadn't, as I didn't feel obligated to share my personal medical history to avoid harassment. The supervisor stood up and said that we were done. He shook my hand and sent me back to my desk, saying that I'd hear from them after they reviewed the evidence, letters, CCTV, medical history, and anything they already had, and made a decision on the case. I got back to my desk, pulled up my CV, and prepared to start the job search again. I was sure I was about to be fired. About an hour went by, then the person who wrote the letter and was there for the lunchroom conversation got called for a meeting with HR. They came back about 10 minutes later. The other people who were also there for the lunchroom conversation got called one by one, except Jill. All of them were gone for about 10 minutes, then came back, found a co-worker, and said that HR wanted to see them. Then the people who wrote letters but weren't there yesterday were also called one by one and were each gone for about 10 minutes each, some longer, some shorter. By about 3:30 p.m. it looked like everyone who wrote a letter or was in the lunchroom had been interviewed. Then Jill got called in. She was gone for about 30 minutes and came back angry. She looked at me while I worked, but I ignored her. Around 4:30 p.m. Jill got called into HR again. 5 o'clock rolled around and everyone was either leaving or getting ready to leave when Jill stormed back into the office. She looked at me the whole time she packed up her desk. She then started telling anyone who would listen that I had gotten her fired before shoving her way onto the lift. An email came in from HR. Case closed. I opened it, half expecting to be told to clear my desk. Instead, it told me that after reviewing all the evidence and interviewing witnesses, they had determined that Jill had created a hostile work environment through harassment. They had terminated her employment effective immediately and wanted to assure me they took these matters seriously. I sat back in my chair, hardly believing what I was reading. For once, the system had worked. The person who had spent months making me feel ashamed and uncomfortable about a medical decision I'd made to save my own life was gone. As I packed up my things to head home, several co-workers stopped by my desk. One invited me to join them for drinks to celebrate Jill's departure. I smiled and nodded. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely in that office. I'd stood up for myself, and it had paid off. That night at the pub, I learned that Jill had been bothering people in the office for years, but everyone had been too afraid to speak up because of her connections in HR. By gathering evidence and standing my ground, I'd not only freed myself but helped create a better work environment for everyone. That was the best drink I've ever had. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.